Thank you. So yes, I'm Julia Stegemann. I'm professor of environmental engineering and director of the EGRM Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Center for Mineral-Based Construction Materials, and I'm a co-investigator, sorry, of the Horizon Europe Futurum project, which underlies all of the presentations in this session. So welcome to all of you. I'm very glad to see you here, and this session is going to be about applications of the UNFC for anthropogenic resources. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to the Futurum project, and we'll then move to presentation and discussion of 4 applications of the UNFC in different European countries, including 1 on a project and 3 in the context of national resource management. We will then conclude with some thoughts from Soraya Heuss, who is leading the Futurum work package on the UNFC, about how the UNFC procedure can be further developed and harmonized for application to all secondary raw materials with development of a common reporting standard. So we'll have all of the presentations in a row, and then we'll have a period at the end for discussion and questions of all of them. If I can have the next slide. So Futurum is a project that's been funded under Horizon Europe to better understand the future availability of secondary raw materials in the EU, with an emphasis on critical raw materials. Pascal already did a longer presentation about this yesterday, which I guess you'll be able to see online. It's a 4-year project being conducted by a consortium of 29 partners and started in June 2022. There are 3 core work packages in this project that are collecting data about the properties of 6 different waste streams, their current arisings and accumulated stockpiles. And this information will then be used together with an understanding of technological and societal trends to forecast supply of secondary raw materials through to 2050. Alongside the material flow analysis, one of the Futurum work packages is further developing the UNFC for classification of anthropogenic resource streams in full consideration of all 3 pillars of sustainability at different scales, from project to regional, nationally, and potentially global scale. Next slide. So these are the 6 anthropogenic resource streams being investigated in Futurum, some of which are being addressed by the applications that are being presented today. I think from that, we'll go on to the first speaker, who is Teemu Karlsson, who's project manager at GTK, Geological Survey of Finland.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And well, first, thank you for this opportunity to present our presentation about the utilization of extractive waste and the Futurum case site in Finland. Yeah, so I'm Teemu Karlsson, and I'm managing this GTK part of Futurum project. And well, I have to say that I'm not into that much in the UNFC in my research work. I'm working more on mine waste environmental issues, but yeah, I'm now managing this project. Next slide, please. So it's a new day, so it's a good start from the basics. As you all know, the demand for metals and minerals it's increasing, especially due to the clean energy transition. And the European Union has a focus on supply security and also on environmental impacts of mining, which spurs interest in utilizing extractive waste as a source of secondary resources. Next slide. In Finland, around 100 million tons of mine waste is being produced annually. It's 74% of the total amount of all kinds of wastes in Finland. Since the 16th century, around 1,100 million tons of waste rock has been excavated, of which most 96% during the around 50 years and half in the last decade. Since the introduction of flotation process method in 1911 in Finland, around 500 million tons of tailings have been generated. Next slide. Currently, the utilization of extractive waste, however, is very low, especially in metal mines, which generate the most of the extractive waste. There, the utilization consists mainly of using waste rocks in earth construction and cavity fillings at the mine site. More utilization is happening at, for example, at limestone quarries, and for example, the Nordkalk company tells that they were utilizing 95% of extracted minerals or materials in 2021. Next slide.
You try to make this work.
Okay. So one of the main barriers preventing mine waste utilization is the lack of systematic national secondary resource management. Good management would require characterization of mine waste, considering resource quantities, technical viability, and also environmental and socio-economical issues. Some data exists, but it's quite scattered, for example, in deposit data reports or risk assessment documents, or there's some compliance monitoring by the authorities. However, the situation will be enhanced as the mine waste containing secondary resources will be included in the GTK's mineral database in near future. And from there, the data will also be harvested to this Futuram database. In general, the resource potential of closed mine sites in Finland has not been studied very well. So more investigations are needed. For example, of the around 80 closed mine waste sites, there's around 90 points on that left map, but 8 of them are active mines. So of the around 80 closed, the largest closed mine waste sites, GTK has currently some kind of data from around 36, which is mainly coming from environmental risk assessment studies. And these studies usually include just few samples here and there. More data is probably available, but we have to do some digging of old archives. Currently, we know that around 19 sites are interesting and might contain some critical raw materials. However, only one site has been thoroughly investigated for remining potential, the Otanmäki tailings site. The Otanmäki iron vanadium mine, it was first owned by the Otanmäki company and later by Rautaruukki company. It was active from around 1953 to 1985, during which 33 million tons of rocks and ore was extracted, of which 25.5 was ore, and from the ore came 11.8 million tons of tailings. This amount includes some minor amounts of slags also. Current plans to utilize tailings and reopen the mine are by Otanmäki Mine Company, which is also a partner, associate partner in this Futuram project. The Otanmäki ilmenite project, it's the project which aims to reprocess the old tailings for ilmenite. It's 100% owned by the Otanmäki Mine Company, and more information about the project you can read from their webpage. So the company started serious investigations at the tailings site in 2017, and the current resource estimate indicates 9.8 million tons at 7.9% of titanium oxide. The company is currently completing the pre-feasibility study phase, and the plan is to start producing ilmenite by the year 2025. They are currently also doing the environmental impact assessment, for example. So the investigations that started in 2017 included some systematic drilling and sampling from over 140 points. The data collected from these samples, it was used to do some resource modeling, and also pilot scale beneficiation tests were made at GTK Mintec, which is our processing research laboratory and pilot plant in eastern Finland. The tailings area, it's quite large, around 170 hectares. The average depth is 4-5 meters, and the deepest parts are around 8 meters. Currently, based on these studies, the Otamäki ilmenite project is classified as 222 according to the UNFC. This means it's a potentially viable project. And as you heard yesterday, the Futuram database, it will include the secondary resources classified based on UNFC, which has benefits including comprehensive and harmonized way of classifying resources, among others. And Finland is the first country to adopt the UNFC for primary mineral resources, and this gives a good base to do the same for the secondary resources also. And the Otamäki tailings project will serve as a case site and example for future tailings utilization projects. So which are the concrete actions that we will be making at the Otamäki site? We are supposed to start drilling next week on Tuesday. There's currently still a bit snow, 20-30 centimeters, but apparently at least the drill crew says that it's not a too big problem. We will test and compare 3 different drilling or sampling methods. The previous sampling was mainly done by auger drilling, and the objective of this study is to see if there are differences between these methods and if the previous sampling was reliable. We will also investigate a smaller area in more detail with around 45-50 closely spaced drill points, and then this area will be modeled, and based on this, the reliability of the previous larger scale modeling will be assessed. And the results and the process of classifying the Otamäki project based on UNFC, it will be documented and it will serve as an example for future projects. The results will be published, for example, at the Futuram channels, so feel free to follow the project there. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Teemu. So, and thank you also for keeping to time. So we're going to take questions on Teemu's presentation at the end of all of the presentations. And now we'll continue with Ronald Arvidsson, who is Senior Geophysicist for SGU, the Geological Survey of Sweden.
Good morning. I will speak about how we apply UNFC and also how we gather mining waste in Sweden. And it's in particular within the Futuram project, but also the past history. Let's see. To begin with, we've been studying mining waste about the past 10 years or so. And it's began with missions to the government and also the old PROSUM project, which was the parent project of Futuram. And now we go with this into Futuram project and our sister project GSEU, which we are also part of, which cooperate on this topic. To begin with, there has been an interest in Sweden we do primary mining. It's one of the major tasks for geological survey to supply data as an infrastructure. And in this sense, we went into mining waste also, a mission from the government. And on the right, far right, we see a selection of critical raw materials within the country, deposits containing them. But they're usually complex, so it's often we have a major common commodity. It could be iron, it could be copper, it could be zinc, something else. And sometimes we get surprises of stuff that we haven't thought about. What we see there is also, in the second picture we see in blue is the tailings that we have depicted, found. And we also have what we call waste rock, which is rock that's been removed out of the mine and been left on the surface. It could either be what was called in the old days was called secondary ore, or it could be simply just rock. We use, for example, look at on how much was extracted to see what potential might be there, but that's not really correct because a lot of the waste goes back into particular underground mines as backfill in order to secure the mine. In all, we have about 1,000 sites, 70 sites we have characterized, and we have about 23 tailings we have studied. We've done it on element level characterization for mineralogy and also for the commodities and so forth. We are not a mining company, so we do not do CRISCO methods. They are very tedious in the sense that it's a very specific set you have to go through. Also, you need the competent persons like Janne Hukka spoke about yesterday, and they are only registered to companies if you follow the CRISCO codes. So, but what we do is that we try to keep a certain standard on the sampling. So we have standardized procedures for sampling both the waste rock as well as the tailings. And as I said, we do for the characterization. We try to get the volume, and the volume goes from the area as well as the depth of the tailings. And this is modeled in two ways. We drill, so when we hit the bottom, we know we have the bottom of the tailings. Secondly, we can use geophysics, and geophysics, the methods we use, electromagnetic methods, give a very good estimate of the depth of the tailings. Further, we also have a cadastre that has been producing maps for quite some time in Sweden, since the actually 17th century. So for some places, we have good data on, detailed data on also the depths to the bottom before the tailings were put in place. So this is an example of one of the old abandoned mining sites that was has a large components of critical raw materials, but it was two main commodities in the past, and it's because the area is complex. So it's not only one mine that's been deposited into this tailing. That is also one thing when we investigate this. There is a substantial amount of iron. There's a substantial amount of copper. These were the main, particularly copper was the main commodity. Then we can find barite, we can find cobalt and molybdenum, small amounts, but rare earth metals, they are almost in the level there of being interesting for extraction. But compared to the presented Kiruna case yesterday, if we would extract all rare earth metals here, it's thousands of what we can extract in Kiruna within the next few years. Then, what can we do with the data when going to the Futuran project? Is that we have a fair amount knowledge of the component in a number of these waste sites. So basically, we are in G3 to G4 with our data. We have G1 to G2. We have 1 or 2 examples out of that, and that is company driven. So we try to differentiate when we translate from the Kirillsk, exactly as Léane said yesterday, we keep the same procedures. And so therefore, that's how we look. But how to do this in Futuran on a so-called regional national scale. Then we look up on procedural levels. So basically, UNFC is case-based. But what can it tell us about the system? That's the interesting thing here. And therefore, we intend to do hearings with the industry to see how far basically can they go with this type of data. It's not really a feasibility. This is no feasibility study that we're doing, but we're looking at what are the potentials there. For the E-axis, there we have done the following with the mission from the government, is that we made hearings. We cross-checked both with authorities, permitting authorities, as well as with industry. And there are challenges because we have, on the one hand, we have the mining law, which is pretty straightforward. On the other hand, we have the waste directive. And in the waste directive, you have to pay for the waste that you will take and do something with. And since these are large volumes, it's rather low concentrations, but it's also that we have cyclicity with the commodity prices. And that means that, say, over time, 10-year time, a project is actually goes with profit. But there are, when you get into lows of some of the commodities, you may not do it for a while. And then if the prices, costs of extraction, for example, for the wasting is put on, that might be a real big challenge to make it work. So this is some things here about this. You are welcome to come and discuss with me afterwards. But now we look up on one particular small case where we have phosphorus. It's an abandoned iron ore mine driven up to the 90s with phosphate and rare earth elements as a part of the waste. And here the good thing is, which also is with the LKAB, is that this type of phosphate is rather low in bad elements. So it's actually very good for putting up into farming. So it's something, if we can put whatever we do with this, is something good for us. And also there is a potential for the rare earth elements. So it's also a process where we actually, to make this profitable, we need the iron, actually. So remove it, it becomes a commodity. We got, secondly, next step, we get phosphate, and the third step, it get rare earth elements. So if we are focused upon rare earth elements, we actually need the other things to make it work, also profit. And it's the company, the pre-feasibility studies on the company homepage there that you can visit and download. So how will this look up in UNFC? We see that we do have fairly advanced lab scale results, which have been, they are successful for phosphate and magnetite. Rare earth elements need further development. So we see here that we can use UNFC, same deposit, and different evaluations in terms of whether we come to potential viability or are still in the prospective stage. Then, what else do we do within Futuran? We have two more cases we work with. One is a case where we work on development, going to the beneficiation tests, rather advanced. The other is that we investigate to see are there interesting surprises in these large tailings that we have up north in Sweden. We could add this that we will go into a little bit broad sense in the axis, also in the work, where we will utilize knowledge from the industry also. These are some of the stuff we have there. We're looking for the full range of the critical raw materials. So this is, we will not release these results yet because some of this is on company ground and it has to be approved by the company so we don't affect any of their values. So procedure-wise, we go into drill. We want to see how dense do we need to sample the drills. So at this stage, we sample each meter to see how random is this. And then we can use this data to see how expensive or cheap is the sampling needed to be. So these are two different sites. And this is this example where we go in and look at copper and cobalt together with the Futuram partner, Lovisa-gruvan. In the other case, we had Boliden company as a partner. So, and here we will do beneficiation test and possibly also do an advanced X-ray sorting to increase the value of the commodities. But this is old crushed rock. So this is a history that goes from the 14th century up into the 20th century in terms of extraction. But it's small, so but it also has a fair amount of rare earth elements. So conclusion, first of all, we're not ready with the project yet, but we could say some things. That to begin with, UNFC is to be seen as a snapshot in time, and if it's also a challenge, we can see the challenges there. So we saw the example where the rare earth elements, I mean, it's an important stuff. They're not yet ready. We saw that the appetite was quite ready. What the company believes is that they found a loophole in the legislation. So that will be interesting to see if that works. They have control over the land, so therefore one reason to raise them on the E-axis, and also on the permitting side, which in many other cases, it seems to be a big challenge. Of course, what can we say about the amount of raw materials we have in the mining waste? We have, in terms of volume, rather decent control of the major part. So, but if we compare to primary mining we're doing today, within the huge mines we have, is that it's comparable to just a few years of extraction. And there's one thing to remember when we do this. We might have interesting surprises for some of the critical raw materials that are necessary in today's development. That is for sure, because it's already ground, the material, so it doesn't need to go through the crusher again. Though there are environmental challenges to extract it, maybe it might be health challenges, because what we find is that the tailings, it's basically silt material, rather coarse. Well, people talk, most of you would recognize it as sand, but there is also probably some clay materials in it. So, because what happens is when we take a bag of the sample, we start to shake it. It's humid, but after shaking, half of it's water. And it means that raw water is actually bound into it. So heavy machinery start to shake on it. One has to have a look what extraction method to use. Do one need to use a big shovel that you pull with a wire or what? So, but that is up to the engineers to look upon. So, but in conclusion, we cannot extract, even if we take out everything, as much as we can from the primary. That is much, and it's much shorter term that we can use it. And we need, when we go to the critical raw materials, we need a combination with them. But also, it's also an entrance into the primary. So for us, it's tying these two type of databases together. So, and these are my colleagues, of course, which has developed the UNFC. Erika is sitting there, my dear colleague there, and a number of other people. And I also would like to thank all of the people in Futurama making the project possible. And we're open to questions afterward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronald. So if you remember, we're taking questions at the end. So do make note of your questions now, and we'll have a general discussion about them at the end. For the moment, we're going on with our next speaker, who is Kirsten Remmen, who is a research associate at Empa in Switzerland.
Yes, thank you very much, Julia. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kirsten, and today I'm going to share some thoughts or insights of finding of our journey on applying UNFC to a Swiss case study on embedded electronics in end-of-life vehicles. So to start with, what's our motivation? Of course, our case study is part of the FutureM project. That's of course a motivation. But another one is that when you look at the United Nations Framework Classification for Resource Update 2019, it stated the project plan may be detailed or conceptual in the case of long-term national resource planning. So what does it mean for conceptual and on national level? And so we said, okay, we're just going to try this in a national case study, but also on secondary raw material from end of life. So our case study we are looking at is a test application on embedded electronic devices in end-of-life vehicles in Switzerland. This is a project we've conducted at Empa, and it was funded by the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. So the database is already available for it. Our approach, how are we tackling this, this challenge? So first of all, we have the database. And today I'm going to share our thoughts on two scenarios. One is the baseline scenario and one is the recycling scenario. I will discuss this a little bit later in detail because it's end-of-life products and waste, so it's a little bit different than from the tailings, what Ronald just explained. Then, of course, we are going to apply the UNFC framework with defining the project, evaluation, and classification. And the outcome or the final output, which I will not present today because it's an ongoing project, so we have a couple of years to go, is consistent, transparent, and comparable reporting within the United Nations Framework for Resource Classification. So the project or the test application we have chosen on a national level, end-of-life vehicles. Those vehicles have embedded electronic devices. Currently, those embedded electronic devices, EED, enter the end-of-life vehicle treatment with the other, with the vehicles and not get extracted. So there we have different fractions, the shredder light fraction, shredder heavy fraction, and in the end, we have basically the base metal recovery from it. So that's the current situation. So no specific critical raw material recovery from EED, just a classic end-of-life vehicle treatment. So for now, our case study, or the second scenario we are investigating, is what happens if I disassemble the embedded electronic devices and not recycle them with the end-of-life vehicles, but put them in the existing Swiss recycling system. And there, of course, then I enable secondary raw material, and critical raw material is more enabled, or higher recovery rates are possible. So now we apply the UNFC to this. First of all, we have to select the factors that we want to assess. And here we also classically chosen according to the axis of the framework, the environmental socio-economic axis. We have those factors chosen, for example, stakeholder interest, environmental impact, but also policy implementation legislation. For the F axis, we have chosen, which is technical feasibility. We have chosen the infrastructure, technology readiness level, and operating license. And for the G axis, degree of consequence, we have chosen a factor supply continuity. How did we choose our factors? They're based on Müller et al., and it's an existing study which is also published. Okay, so we could do this again. Due to time constraints, I'm going to focus on a few factors today and not all of them. For the G axis, it will be the supply continuity. For the F axis, TRL, and for the E axis, the environmental impact. So we're going to start with the G axis, supply continuity. Here, as I mentioned earlier, we will look at the two scenarios, of course, and the evaluation method we've chosen, or which has been conducted in the existing project, is a dynamic material flow analysis and simulations for that. We have the two scenarios, our baseline scenario, no specific critical raw material recovery, and we have the recycling critical raw material recovery from EED. And here we have the result, as the CRMs do not enter the recycling system, we give this a G4 because it did not developed from perspective project. And for the recycling scenario, we've chosen a G2 as we have a moderate level of confidence. Why do we only have a moderate level of confidence? This is due to the fact that we have at the secondary raw material supply continuity from end-of-life products strongly depend on external factors. For example, what is the product that is entering the waste? And that highly depends on what products are entering the market. So therefore, we have high uncertainties, and that's the reason why we've chosen a G2 for this factor. The next part I'm going to talk about is the F-axis, technology readiness. Again, our two scenarios, and the evaluation method, of course, we choose a TRL. What we see here is that it is difficult to apply the TRL because we have an integrated system. In Switzerland, it's called SWICO and SENS. And here on the bottom right side, you see the system that's already established since 1993 in Switzerland, SENS e-recycling. And you see we have collection, logistics, recycling, it's already well established. So therefore, we thought we rather need to call it system readiness approach, or that might make more sense to apply that than rather the TRL. And also we realized that this system readiness approach is going beyond the F-axis. So therefore, we change the TRL level to system readiness level. And here again, our result for the baseline, it's an F4 because no development project has been identified with the current system. When we go to our recycling project, we see an F1 because the technical feasibility has been proven or has been confirmed because it's already there. With this, I would like to go to the next axis, which is the E-axis, environmental impact. We have chosen the method life cycle assessment, LCA. And here I want to go a little bit in detail and share a little bit of our results with you. Here you can see a result of the project. On the y-axis, you see the environmental impact. And on the x-axis for the bar charts, you see for 4 EEDs, you see on the left side the baseline, and on the right side, you see the recycling. For example, for the headlights in blue, for the actuators in orange, controllers green, and cables yellow. And here we can see that on the top part, we see the relative environmental benefit, and on the bottom part, the treatment-related impact. And here you can see, as soon as we apply the added recycling or the recycling scenario, we have an increase in relative environmental benefit for 3 of the discussed components. For the cables, we do not see it as much. So therefore, we can use these results and this knowledge to evaluate the factor environmental impact. Here for the baseline, of course, the E1, you also saw a relative environmental impact or benefit, not impact, of course, sorry. So we evaluated with an E1. But of course, if we see at the specific scenario, critical raw materials not entering or not specifically recovered, we cannot evaluate it because we didn't test it. When we now look at the scenario, we see that there's also an E1 because the ED recycling leads to an overall environmental benefit for the headlights, actuators, and controllers. So what are our lessons learned from this? We see that life cycle assessment is a suitable method to evaluate environmental impact on a system level. But also what's really interesting that we identify the hotspots with it. We saw for the headlights, the actuators, and controllers that there is an extremely environmental benefit for it. And so therefore we can use this to evaluate those projects further with United Nations Framework for Resource Classification. Then also what we see here a connection to other factors, for example, on the E-axis legislation. And as you here, I state here, as part of the Swiss e-waste legislation, it stated embedded electronics devices from vehicles need to be separately recycled if it's economically viable and environmentally sound. And the environmentally soundness we have proven on a system level with this. So 5 final slides, our lessons learned, and also the future and roadmap. So what are we going to do now with this ongoing process? First of all, the summary, you can see the secondary raw material supply continuity from end-of-life products strongly depends on external factors. a system readiness approach might make more sense on a national level for this conceptual approach, and that is also going beyond the x-axis. And our last lesson learned I want to share with you today is that a life cycle assessment is a suitable method to evaluate environmental impact on a system level, and also very important to identify the hotspots for our potential projects. So how are we going to use now this knowledge? So we're going to use this knowledge to develop in the FutureREM roadmap, to develop a consistent procedure to assess and classify SRM, secondary raw materials, recoverability in line with the UNFC. And we use these case studies to further develop, validate, and demonstrate the procedure in line with the UNFC. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention and also acknowledge the input from Charles Mami and Isabelle Boudin, which are not co-authors of this presentation, but supported us a lot. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions later.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. So yeah, we'll have the questions. We have 2 more presentations, and then we'll have the questions. So the next presentation in relation to the applications is being given by Léane Verhulst, who is a mineral intelligence analyst engineer from BRGM, the French Geological Survey.
Thank you, Julia. So yesterday I presented you a project, a primary resources project, and now I will present you an example of recycling and recovery projects. So again, to introduce the subject, EGRM requested us in 2021 to map ongoing and potential primary CRM projects in France using UNFC. But France is already a producer of some CRM as a byproduct. For example, we produce indium from zinc production and hafnium from zirconium production. And France is also a CRM producer via recycling, and mostly from waste from electrical and electronic equipment. So in our study, we decided to include ongoing projects producing CRM after recycling or after byproduct recovery process. So as I said yesterday, we classified 44 projects for primary resources and secondary resources. And concerning those projects, they produce, for example, cobalt, nickel, lithium, indium, hafnium, and platinum group metals. So when you're trying to classify a recycling project, there are many criteria and criteria to determine and consider. So when you are studying the e-axis, one of the main questions you have to answer is a project is in an industrial plan with plants with already granted environmental authorizations, and if those environmental authorizations already cover the environmental impact of recycling processes. Then, when you're studying the f-axis, of course, you have to determine the degree of maturity of recycling processes, but based only on the public data, you're facing issues of confidentiality because it really depends on the patterns. And then you, of course, have to assess the knowledge of the composition of the recycled products and flows. For example, you have to determine the chemistry of batteries, the chemistry of permanent magnets, etc. But for this point, it is also related to the d-axis. So as you can see, the 2 axes are interdependent. For the f-axis, you also have to determine the capacity to collect the waste streams, if there is, for example, partnership with a waste collector. And finally, you have to assess, to determine unexpected annual production. So as you can see, it's really tricky questions, and based on the public data, it's quite difficult to answer them. So now let me introduce you an example of secondary resources project classification with the RELIEF project. So this is a collaborative research and innovative project which aims to develop an innovative process for recycling lithium-ion batteries and to structure an integrated industrial sector from the collection and the dismantling end-of-life batteries to the recycling of the elements they contain. So concerning the E-axis, on the environmental point of view, the project is located in an industrial facilities in operation under the ICPE regime. On the economic point of view, there is a secure funding, and the European recycled battery but the European recycled battery market is still very immature, so you have to take into account this point. And on the social point of view, note there is no actual social opposition at this stage. So globally, the project is considered potentially viable in the future. It's E2 rank. On the F-axis, there is extraction and transformation at the pilot scale of nickel, cobalt, lithium, and manganese into new metals of battery grade. So pre-feasibility phase is done, and we have proven results at the pilot scale. So the project is considered again potentially viable in the future. But on the G-axis, we have to know the possible battery chemistry, and as said before, it's quite difficult to evaluate this point, and there are high uncertainties about the amount and types of batteries collected in the future. And of course, nobody knows at this stage what is really the battery life on the market. So we need additional data, and the project is classified as G2 to the G3. To conclude, we consider that UNFC is an efficient tool to evaluate and compare projects at different scales using a multi-criteria approach, and it allows you to determine which barrier prevents your project to progress. So UNFC has to be used as a decision-making tool to invest and orientate policy governance. Of course, when you're classifying a recycling project, you have to keep in mind comparability with primary resources, but you also have to consider the specificity of recycling projects, especially on the F and G axis. During our work, we faced issues on data needed to classify projects. Again, we need confidential data, so we have to have trust and partnerships with industrial players. We have to consider that there is interdependence between the different axes of the classification, and there are high uncertainties concerning the G-axis, in particular with regards to the competitions and flows of materials to be recycled. So this is why I want to highlight the importance of Futuram and GSEU projects to coordinate internationally the methodology of the UNFC and the actions of the various European actors. And then, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Léane, and thank you all of you for presenting such interesting and varied applications of the UNFC. We're now going to hear from Soraya Heuss-Aßbichler with a more general perspective about the UNFC methodology in this context. Soraya is professor of mineralogy and petrology at LMU Munich.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present our results. We are developing under Futuram, and I just want to go to the main goals regarding UNFC under Futuram. So it is to develop knowledge on the availability and recoverability of secondary raw materials within the EU, with a special focus on critical raw materials. And the other part is to enable fact-based decision-making for secondary raw materials and critical raw materials exploitation, and through UNFC, and the dissemination of this information via systematic and transparent knowledge base. You heard already that we have 6 different waste streams, which we are under consideration. And of course, they are selected based on the fact that they have the potential to have critical raw materials. And based on the fact that we have a mining waste, we have also the opportunity to develop a conception which is comparable with that in primary resource sector. Our goals regarding UNFC are shown here. So it is to develop a methodology for assessing the availability and recoverability of the secondary raw materials. And of course, here it is our main focus to look at the critical raw materials production, and also to test these methodology through 19 case studies, which are on the company level, but also on national level. When we want to compile these different approaches, which have to be considered for these different waste streams in a harmonized procedure, and present a reporting template for communication of these UNFC assessment results. To do that, we want to have a structured procedure so that can be used for each kind of project, and to assure that we have the comparability. That means we have to start with a clear definition of the system and to say which part of the complex waste production system and treatment system is in focus of our investigation. That means to look if it is if we look at this system like treatment, do we consider the collection system? In as much we consider the time frame, because the composition of the waste changed with time, and if we look at company level, or do we consider that on regional or even national or beyond? The next part, the project evaluation and classification, you have already seen several examples how to do that. And that is what is, of course, in line with the guidance of UNFC documents. To make it more clear, I want to show this UNFC cube, which I think is an excellent potential to show with each of these boxes representing EFG code, and a class with the subclasses immediately informs you about the maturity level of the project. That means if you follow the development of the project, you immediately know what happens, and that everyone who is familiar with the procedure knows what happens. If it's starting with this, if it's coming from the primary sources or secondary, so that is what is the main base for the communication. But it is more than that, because we heard that we have for the waste, we have external factors. The composition of the input material may change. That has to be taken into account. At the same time, we want to know the products developed based on the treatment, and all that information is given by the G-axis. That means how the degree of confidence about the amount of materials we get. That is what we want to record. But of course, you heard it already in the previous presentation, that depends on the technology. So we have also to consider the technology which is available. And depending on the definition of the project, one project may be considered as viable because we have the high level of knowledge for the specific elements, but for the critical raw materials, maybe we have not. And that means for the critical raw materials, the classification could be another one. And that is something which is necessary to be defined from the beginning so that you avoid to have a misunderstanding. And the knowledge, so on one side, you have the information about the maturity level of the project, but at the same time, you can also use the same system for resource management, because we don't only want to know how far the project is developed, we also want to know how much of the material can be brought back to the circular economy. That means to see which the quantity of the material which is extracted, and that depends on the technology. So if we heard yesterday that maybe that only 10% of the lithium is brought back to the circular economy, So what happens with the 90%? With a mass flow analysis, we can see what happens with these materials. Are they collected in materials in the stock and could be provided as a material for the future, or does it get lost in materials which are also brought to the circular economy, but are distributed in a way that we cannot get access to these elements? These are information which are very important for the management of these resources. At the same time, we want also to think about the circular economy. That means which quality these materials have. So is it in a high quality to use that again and again, or do we have a degradation of these elements coming in materials so that in the future we lose them and cannot bring it back to the circular economy? And the other aspect is also to think about sustainability aspects. That means, what are these elements? Are they in a part which could be harmful for the future, or are they in a way extracted so that they can be a product? And of course, all of that depends on these e-axis. And here we have the opportunity to distinguish them separately, looking at the economic viability, which is important to develop this project, but also to consider separately on the environmental and social impact in the framework of the legal aspects, the rules and the regulations developed, and in the context of the country's policy. And based on this way to look at in the different, in the specific procedure, in a consistent way, you have the transparency to compare the projects and make it fact-based decisions. So based on all this information, that means we need also a strict reporting template to communicate this information to all these persons who are involved and are important to develop such projects and enable the project. It also enables us to see where are the potentials of the project, the opportunities which are can be the enabler of these projects, but also to see where are these barriers and to think about it, how it can be solved, and to make these projects viable. And these information are necessary for the inventory of the secondary raw materials in different level. It's interesting for the companies, of course, but also for the nations and also EU. And that has to be considered through all this, across all these 6 different waste streams, to have a harmonized procedure which can be used by hopefully everyone in an easy way, in a way that they can do that with parallel to their work. That means that we want to have standardized procedures which can be used by for the different stakeholders, and provide a guidance document to show what can be done and how it can be done. And that should be accompanied by a reporting template. And these will be presented to EGRM for endorsement. So we want to test and validate this procedure with case studies. In total, we have 19 different case studies, 10 case studies considering 4 different waste streams. You see here these spots showing them. There are these minings from the mining sector, but also from other waste streams. And we have also 9 different case studies which are on national level. So the roadmap for the project in total is has 4 years time. We started last year. We are now the development of a consistent procedure. And at the same time, we are developing the case studies to test our methodology and to improve it. And of course, we want to hurry up to have a good way so that we have also the reporting template and test it again and again so that we have provided a consistent procedure at the end. I want to invite you to register the Futuram homepage and follow our activities and give us our ideas, share your ideas, your thoughts, your input is welcome. And also we want to have you where you see challenges so that we can consider during our procedure, because that is very important to meet all these expectations and also to consider these parts which are thought to be, has to be solved. So to sum up, I think that UNFC, you have seen so many different approaches, how it can be used. And I think that you are convinced that it is a very powerful tool to communicate the recoverability of raw materials from primary resources, but also from secondary sources. And it is an excellent base for the stakeholders to communicate because they use the same principles. But it is also very powerful to highlight the benefits, the opportunities of a project, and also the barriers, which is very necessary if you want to develop them. And it is also provides a knowledge base for fact-based decisions. And we want to have at the end of our project 19 examples of UNFC case studies as examples for future development of projects, the guidance document for project evaluation, a draft reporting template, and hopefully that can be endorsed by UNECE, by EGRM, and also we hope that European Commission takes up our proposals. So for that, I thank you for listening. You see here all our consortium members, and we look forward to have your to look for your questions and get feedback also later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erika. Thank you, Charlotte. Good morning, everyone. So now we are having a kind of a truly global session in 3 continents. We can't just UNECE, but we all live in an ecosystem called the Earth, and geology doesn't recognize any frontiers or anything, and so the CIM. And actually, would you agree that we truly believe in a fantastic era of transformation, caused, of course, by science and science-induced technology? And science, of course, the essence of science is the parameterization of data. And in this sense, this unique tool, which was developed here as a UNFC, is essential, as it's allowing us to create a holistic approach of unifying data and creating a common methodology, which is the foundation of science and research. But in this sense, as we could have seen within this 2 days, different approaches are pretty developed. So even within Western Europe, there is not only one approach, and there is no unified system yet. And on the other hand, on the western part of Europe, or eastern part of Europe, it's another system, it's a post-Soviet system. And also, presumably there are other development in Africa and Latin America. That are what we're going to highlight in our session. And the first speaker I would like to introduce to is Sergii Paiuk, the chairman of the State Commission of Ukraine on Mineral Resources. As we all know, Ukraine was one of the first European states which introduced United Nations system, even in the late 1990s, as far as I know. And this presentation is essentially important in the terms of what is going on today. And it's important for all of us to focus on continuing because life will continue. I do believe in it, and I am very confident. And it's important not to interrupt our processes, especially the research and the development and classification of data. It's extremely essential, even at the times of the most hardship and survival. Sergei, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Good morning, dear colleagues, participants. In 1997, Ukraine was the first country in Europe and worldwide to implement the UNFC standards to the national level. The classification of reserves and resources was approved by the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers. Then amendments were introduced to the classification considering the UNFC development. The latest amendments were made in 2018 to comply with the UNFC 2009. Ukraine belongs to countries with systematic reporting and accounting of mineral reserves and resources. In Ukraine, the primary state institution responsible for such accounting is the Ukrainian Geological Survey. All mineral reserves are completed in the National Balance of Minerals of Ukraine, which has been maintained since the middle of the 20th century. And if the assessment of Ukraine's mineral reserves and resources is conducted by the National Commission of Ukraine on Mineral Resources following the classification of mineral reserves and resources of the National Subsoil Fund, which is harmonized with the UN framework classification, then the national balance of mineral reserves has traditionally been recorded in categories of the former Soviet Union classifications, since a significant number of deposits was assessed and recorded in the national balance at that time. Since 1997, reserves of almost 4,000 deposits have been assessed according to the classification based on the UNFC. The assessment of oil and gas deposits, precious stones, has been fully completed. But more than 5,000 deposits of other minerals must be reassessed. Most of them are non-operated deposits of building materials and groundwater, which are unlicensed, and their investment attractiveness is unclear due to the fact that the classification of the former Soviet Union considered only the degree of geological study, but not economic and social parameters. Considering the current state of affairs, the Ukrainian Geological Survey and the National Commission of Ukraine of Mineral Resources are working on the harmonization of classification categories of previous years with the UN framework classification. For the national balance of minerals to comply with the new classification based on the UNFC, methodological guidelines have been developed to bring reserves of objects recorded in the national balance of mineral reserves of Ukraine, which are not under development, into compliance with requirements of the classification. The methodology implies the harmonization of classification features according to the level of economic and commercial significance, axis E, the degree of feasibility study and preparedness of mineral deposits for further use, axis F, and the degree of geological study and confidence, axis G. We are convinced that the integration of mineral resource accounting standards within the UN framework opens up economic and social benefits for Ukraine, and the management of state accounting using the UNFC principles fully reflects the current state of Ukraine's mineral and raw minerals base, which will allow decisions to be made regarding the direction of investments and the concentration of our efforts. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sergei. That was very informative. And before going to the other continents, as I mentioned, we would like to continue our journey in the post-Soviet realm. And it's my particular pleasure to introduce the next speaker, who is going to highlight not only the reality of Kazakhstan in terms of parameterizing the data and focusing on the implementation of the UNFC approach in Kazakhstan, but also in the whole Central Asian region, which is getting more and more important in the light of the all natural wealth and reserve of the CMR, which we have in abundance in our bowels. And it's that is why launching, designing a unified approach methodology is extremely essential. And also I have to mention that Kazakhstan geographically, it's part of Europe. We have 15 territories located beyond the Ural River, which is geographically, was designed in London in the 19th century, is Europe. So it's my pleasure to introduce my compatriot, Viktor Babashev. He's the vice chair of GMR expert group here and at the UNECE with his report on UNFC and UNMC in Central Asia way forward. Viktor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for such a rich introduction. But so first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm being part of the EGRM community or family, if you want, since 2019 as a sole chair from Kazakhstan. And actually what today I will speak in my presentation is not about the numbers, it's actually about the approaches. So the two questions that I would like you all to think, how the country can keep its independence in terms of the estimation reserves, achieving the goals, and be transparent to international society, like financial one. So being said that, the research that we've been running for almost 2 years actually give us some results which I would like to share with you. So general information. So this one. Central Asia countries, again, ranked by GDP. So they are Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. So the balance of the minerals and oil and gas resources might be varies, but what they united by is by the system. All of them are uses former or based Soviet Union as called JKZ system, state reserve system, that actually have tools, the main tools to control the extraction of the reserves. So this is all this system I intend to is actually to protect the interest of the government. So as for today, several case studies have been implemented for using UNFC reporting the reserves both on minerals and for the oil and gas. In Kazakhstan in particular, the transition to international systems are in the law, but the process is ongoing. And I think all other countries in Central Asia will come up to the moment because all of them have the same goals, I would say. It's attracting investments from the foreign countries and be transparent. So how we can move forward in that? So as I said previously in 2019, sorry, I'm forgetting that. We did the huge case studies where with the participant of all the parties, which were the ministers, the association, and we took one field and play some outcomes. What if the Kazakhstan will go for several international systems compared to what they have now? So the main conclusion is that any international system, they have discounted key indicators, which mean that all the cash flows to rank the project are discounted to the year where it assessed, while the government task or state task, if you want, is to operate over the cash flow, non-discounted cash flow. It means that the task of the government is to secure all future cash flow that would require to maintain SDGs for the future of the population. So why social? We actually come up with the term called the social undiscounted rate. Why is it important? So when you apply the higher discount rate, you less value the future cash flows that might be required for the sake of the country. When you apply a lower discount rate, it means that you actually take future more weight and take more interest to the future cash flow and actually take care of the future goals, etc. So we come up to this to the conclusion that keeping the current system to maintain all strategic goals of the government, any state, take Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, is very vital to the independence of the state. But any state system has its drawbacks. You already know that. So it's we come up with 4. There may be more of them. So which are inability to compare reserves and resources between international system and in-house or government RMS, low confidence of international contractors in the government balance sheet, low confidence of international financial institution, and of course, limited access to the modern methodics and technologies. So due to these factors, if one country decides to go and just to switch as is to any international system, they might not reach the desired results. Because for me and for the group, and actually I think for all of us in EGRM, the transforming or transitioning from the current system to international is more complex process. Sorry, I was forgetting why. I don't know. Excuse me, so I'm forgetting to push that button. So we build the matrix of 9 key parameters. Unfortunately, due to limitation on the slides, I cannot show them, but we play this scenario. What if this is the key parameter 4? What if the one country will choose the international system as is? Will it achieve the goals of attracting investment? Will it be more transparent to other investors or other financial institutes, and come up with a solution that is not? So for us, taking any international system from the scratch, putting it to the structure of the government or the state will not result to the desired goals. So what might be the way forward? What can we do to keep the independence of the state from one side, keeping the SDGs, and make the system recognizable by international society and financial institutes? I'm pressing, okay. So we developed the workflow, if you want. So how any country, so being the part of the EGRM, can choose, and if they choose, can actually make the reserve management system independent and internationally recognizable. So these are 4 steps, but again, these steps, I have some sub-steps, but in general, it's first of all, take and reconcile local reserves to the UNFC reserve groups. So update how to estimation, so to be in line with the current UNRMS guidelines, how to estimate minerals, how to estimate oil and gas and other resources. What we think important is actually update requirements for the component person. So the one who will be in charge of the calculating and estimating reserves. And of course, the system that pass these 3 steps should be harmonized to get the international recognition. So I will speed up myself, thank you. So this approach for us will maintain independence of any local system and eliminating the disadvantages of local system or state system or in-house system, if you want, in comparison with any international one. So way forward, we welcome from EGRM, so representative from all the countries to participate in our working group. So we have huge amount of working group. So this actually professionals from all over the world. So we'll continue to run case studies. We'll continue to run meetings and roundtables. And of course, we'll continue, I think, this year to come up with a unified how-to or roadmap, how to bridge your system, what you need to do in terms of the local activities and international activities. So do I have a minute left? No? That's it? Okay, so by finishing my presentation, I want to thank you all. And again, wishing our community prosperity and of course, prosperity to any state. Thank you very much.
Truly informative and overview. So your expert view on the matter of affairs with all the approaches developed in the whole Central Asian region. Now we are going to enhance not a country, not a nation, and not even a region, but a whole continent, whose importance is essentially keeps growing, increasingly keeps growing for global development. And I'm pretty sure that by the end of the century, this continent is going to play extremely essential role in global affairs in all senses, and especially, of course, in CMR, which are abundant there. And it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Senior Advisor, Geological and Mineral Information of Africa Mineral Development Center, AMDC, in Addis Ababa, Tunde Apikola. Tunde, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I prefer to use the podium. Sorry. To use the podium because in Africa, when you stand up to speak, it means you mean business. Yeah, so I actually mean business. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I have to thank UNECE for all the landmark roles we've been playing, not only on UNFC, but from time immemorial, from cabin, emission, seatbelts, a lot of things people take for granted. You are always in the forefront. We have to thank you for that. And thank you for supporting Africa. When I joined this group about a decade ago, and I told McDonald then that, look, I've come to see, and we have a team to look at the totality of UNFC, and I can assure you we'll take to the next level. He wished me all the best. And by 2016, we didn't get restricted by the UNFC alone. We started what we call AMREC. And 1 or 2 years later, URMS also started. So we are your senior. Now, what is this AMREC is all about? It's basically African Mineral and Energy Resources Classification and Management System, which is actually based on UNFC in total. We are not reinventing the wheel, we are not changing anything. But this African of my generations is not the kind of Africa where you give everything to and thinks he will take it in hook and sinker. No. We look at it, look at the effects you have on the continent, of course, add African value without changing the principle. This is exactly what we have done. Now, is a comprehensive system for management of African mineral and energy resources, simplicity, which is aligned with our own vision of AMV, African Mining Vision, which started the same year, with UNFC, independent of one another. Then, of course, we have Agenda 2063, which expects Africa to be integrated, peaceful, prosperous, being, driven by Africans in the global community. Somebody like me. That is the key word. We have to do things in our own way. I'm sorry, we don't have apology for that. Now, this includes Pan-African resources, Pan-African resource reporting codes, which is the game changer, something nobody has ever talked about when the NFC started. And of course, it's a single classifications of all natural resources, including anthropogenics and what have you. And you can see the simple, the ecosystem, the mining vision in the graphical form. Now, oh, keep moving. Yes, I don't have to teach you this because this is the foundation. You don't have to tell the Pope how to administer Holy Communion. You don't have to do that. Pope know that. This is one of the biggest extra good I've ever known. But this is the foundation of AMREC, EFG, which all of you know, which applies to minerals, petroleum, renewable, nuclear, anthropogenic, and so on. One key thing in Africa is that mineral means everything, the three states of matter. In Africa, when you say mineral, it can be gas, it can be solid, it can be anything, it can be water. So that's a unique definition. Now, the principle is this. The basic principle, there are so many subdivisions which you know. I don't have to teach you that. Of course, what intrigues us is that we look at all the totality of other systems. No one, including this, these three axes. Some people call it level of confidence. I personally call it geology. I'm a geologist. We look at the project feasibilities, and then of course, we look at the economic viabilities. And when you combine this, you focus on social and environmental aspects, you are done. Because a lot of projects in Africa were stalled by the environmentalists, just what is happening in Europe. Yeah, how does it work? You know so much about this. I don't have to tell you how this is done. You have to combine everything to get things going. It's a tool to realize our own vision, the African mining vision. Now, in assessing resources generally, in modern days, you need to look at all these factors. All other systems, be it SPE, Crisco, or what have you, they look at the profit. They don't go for small deposits, but this actually go for all kinds of deposits, no matter the size. And they also, it's applicable to the entire cycle of the project, from exploration, evaluation, mining, processing, marketing, and what have you. It can't be better than that. That is why Africa went for it. It's not just because it's done by, United Nations alone. And of course, you look at all the details, project visibility, water use, and what have you. So, this is key. Even though AMREC started before UNMC, but we merge into it because when there are developments, you follow. You look at the state right and responsibility responding to the planet. This is the only planet we have. So it's our responsibility to preserve it. We integrated and individuals management. So all these details you see there, health and safety, innovation, transparency, circularity, value addition is so key to Africa because you must, if you want to have mineral, you must add value in the continent. Otherwise, it will be a problem to you because we don't have the technology for the manufacturing of the items, but we have the resources. You call it critical. We don't call it critical. We call it strategic. No apology about that. It's critical to your survival. It's critical to, it's strategic to our development. So, but it means the same thing as a scientist. Now, this is the one most of you probably not know about. This is African way of doing our own thing. Pan-African Resource Reporting Code. All other code, we are not part of it. It's always good to have a say in matters that affect you. This is not school prefects or servant to masters. Anything that affects us, we want to have our way. We have looked at all other codes. We decided to do our own code, which is adopted by Africa. You don't have to like it, but we have to work together. Because I know all the successful nations always have their own way of doing things. But mining is a global community. So you need to understand what we are doing if you want to operate safely and profitably in Africa. Because we are not asking for anything. We are just demanding for equity. That's all. So this is Pan-African.
You have 1 minute left, please.
How many minutes?
One minute.
Oh,
left.
you have 1 minute.
Sorry.
But this is something you really need to know, this particular slide. We have gone through 3 stages. The Council of Ministers of 51 members, they approved it in 2021. The Council of Foreign Ministers approved it. Same 2021, in 2022. Then the African Head of State. So it's a law, it's a statute. You have to respect that, because that is what we are trying to do. We just did the continental something in Namibia. And I don't know. Yeah, I had people talking about case study. These are the case study we have done. This is no theory. Published by UNFC, you have 2 cases in Egypt, Malawi, Niger, Nigeria, probably by is in their website. You can check. Advanced stage case studies going on in Namibia and Uganda. That of Uganda is on oil and gas. The Ugandans are here. You can find in front of us. These are other case studies going on across the Africa wide. Yes, then there are platforms for disseminating information. I don't know whether any continent have that. We have our expert group made of experts. Interestingly, two of the experts, one of them is Ari, and then Julian is there. 98% Africans. But because of the support from EU, we have to involve them because we didn't start this process anyway. Then we have what we call AMRED Legacy Platform, likely for African youth. They have WhatsApp group, they have their own sort of things. Everybody must know what we are doing. Then we have the AMRED Foundations and Dissemination online training course for young entrepreneurs. We are not looking at Rio Tinto. We are looking at young entrepreneurs who are African, who have their money. When you have your money, you don't need to beg anybody. So that's exactly what you are doing. Then workshops, and just the way I'm here, we do it all over the world. And of course, we have publications. And this is our website. You can always get these things. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tunde. You've been so right to emphasize that unfortunately, this is the only planet we have. Although we all know another planet, which is completely inhabited by AI and robots, there are 7 of them on Mars. But meanwhile, with a kind of a supersonic speed, we keep traveling around the globe. Sorry. And it's another pleasure of mine to introduce another speaker representing another continent. And now I'm talking about Latin America. And I would like to give the floor to Ulysses Neri, Executive Director of EGRM in Latin America. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. In this presentation, I would like to explain you in some slides what is the new perspective of the sustainability in the certain industries and the energy sector in Latin America. In this regard, the first, I would like to say that Latin America and Caribbean zone is the region with more social environmental challenges in extractive industries, mining, oil and gas, and energy as well in different perspectives. Second, water stress is one of the main worries now we already have in different sectors. Specific, these worries are focused in mining. In mining, different kind of the mining, copper, lithium, even another kind of the products and materials as well is part of these worries from the countries, from the governments, from the society related with this part of the activities. Now, related with industry, there are some expectations from the society, from the industry, from the government. And now the question is possible to address properly the expectations from the different stakeholders, from the society, from the government, from the industry in Latin America? What kind of the tools, methodologies, or approach is possible to implement? SDGs or ESG? For the industry, they are more comfortable or they perceive that the ESG methodologies, ESG standards, it could be the solution. However, for the governments, even for the society, SDGs, they are more comfortable with this approach in order to understand the different challenges. The pressures are increasing in social, especially demanding from the young people, financial, investors associated with the risk, and politicians that is part of the central campaigns platform. What could be solved of these challenges? Can the extractive industries and the energy sector contribute with the SDGs agenda? How can be fitted to the reality or priorities of the countries and beyond? How are going to avoid greenwashing or SDG washing? Which tools can be used or can be addressed properly? In this regard, what could be the contribution from the extractive industries and the energy sector in this 2030 agenda? In order to address properly this, we need to avoid this fragmented impact on the SDGs without indicators, random selection of SDGs, no certified actions, decoupled from the economic and financial impacts, decoupled mainly from the expectation from the society, especially for the local communities related with implications about all the worries and the challenges in this part. And beyond, it will be sustainability is beyond to the philanthropy of the social responsibility. UNFC and UNRMS offers the opportunity to evaluate properly all of these implications and try to address these challenges and these worries from the countries and even from the society. Try to link these UNRMS principles with the UNFC in order to achieve or to address properly these SDGs in the 2030 agenda, together with some local agreements like the Acuerdo Escazú or another agreements linked with the promotes the sustainability in the extractive industries. UNRMS and UNFC, there are tools. Now we can design a decarbonization and sustainable roadmaps in the extractive industries and energy sector as well. To meet the expectations from the society, to meet the expectations from the government, to meet the expectations from the company. Try to develop a decarbonization and sustainable roadmap through UNFC and UNRMS. It could be or will be the tools that to address properly all of these expectations from different stakeholders. To finalize this presentation, how can we implement UNFC and UNRMS and the impact in the 2030 agenda? At first is understand what is exactly all the implications or what is exactly the UN 2030 agenda at different levels. Try to evaluate the governance maturity from the organizations, even from the government, in terms to apply and to implement this 2030 agenda properly. After that,
sorry, you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, thank you. To finalize is to set a reference framework to use UNFC and also to use UNRMS in order to achieve and to design and to establish a sustainable investment in order to meet the expectations for the different stakeholders in this part. It's my last slide. Next Friday, I'm going to explain the different initiatives, projects, government commitments, and even from the industry commitment related with the application and implementation of UNFC and UNRMS through the International Center of Excellence. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you very much. We look forward to your next presentation on Friday. Also, a big spoiler, I invite all of you to my session tomorrow, another when I'm going to speak about Central Asian wealth, and it's important for global development, especially in the highlight of the recent discovery of a superconductor. All right. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I hope you have enjoyed the traveling around the globe and then highlighting how its UNDC2 instrument is deployed in 3 continents. And now I'm handing the overall process back to Erika. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this impressive panel. And I think now, because of time constraints, we need to move on to the next part of the schedule. And I will welcome up on stage Slavko Solar and the panel coming with him. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I put it here.
have 5 minutes to.
Yeah.
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 You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I need to read out this stuff. There is something.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Wait, can you start?
Yeah, you can start. Oh, Yannick is coming here.
Yeah, good.
we are starting the last session, which is entitled Looking Forward. And the session will go in a way that first we'll have a presentation, and then we will have the panelists that would actually respond to the presentation. And of course, the audience online and in the room will be able to ask questions regarding UNFC in the future. So it is my pleasure to introduce Stefan Burg. Stefan is director of FREMI, the French Mineral Intelligence Center, hosted by the French Geological Survey, BRGM. He is a member of the French Committee for Strategic Metals, hosted by the Ministry of Ecological Transition, and he is leading the European Expert Network on Critical Raw Materials Screen, supported by the European Commission, supporting the European Commission in its critical raw material strategy and the periodic critical assessment. So, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Slavko. So you asked me to give an introductory speech to the needs of National Mineral Agency through an illustration with the French Geological Survey. And I already thanks Léane that you heard yesterday and this morning that really helped me to prepare this introductory speech. So yeah, as you said, I'm the director of the French Mineral Intelligence Center. This is a public-private partnership supporting the strategy of the French government and the industrial sectors in France. We are carried out monitoring on the offer, the demand, and we are carrying out dedicated value chain studies to support decision makers on the public and on the private side. And then we have quite global vision of the different challenges that we have in France regarding the mineral resource strategies. Concerning the position of the BRGM on the UNFC, what is the context? It was said very often during the last 2 days, there is no standardized data on deposits, resources, reserves in France right now. And there is no constraining regulation framework for reporting on deposits, resources, and reserve. Today, some self-declaration of industries, many to crisscross, are done with a non-homogeneous level of information, in particular for new, and it's only done for new projects. It means, that Léane illustrated this quite well, there is no classification right now of former and old projects, which could be now or in the future, new opportunities. We need a value chain approach in the UNFC. It was said also UNFC. UNFC is not a deposit classification, it's a project classification. And therefore, UNFC should be a decision support tool when building a supply chain and not only for assessing a single stage of a global value chain. So we need to widen the study boundaries to the entire project. We need to analyze options for each brick of the project, and we have to connect the best bricks for answering an industrial need, meaning that at the end, the best compromise is maybe not made from the best brick of each step. And this is why it's very important to have this entire project assessment. We need to harmonize and to share. We need to harmonize and to share the methodology. We have to agree on the fact that we need to be trained, it was mentioned, and skilled to perform this classification that should not be at the end expert dependent. However, this classification should not be done on a too macroscopic level. The higher macroscopic you are, the easiest it is to find the same results. However, when you enter into the details, now you need a clearer methodology that has to be really shared and diffused. The transparency, this evaluation have to be shared more widely across Europe for more coordination, again, in this project framework. And we have to find complementarities between the different bricks that we will have in any projects and avoid duplicates. In particular, if we find somewhere a well-ranked or classified brick of a project, then it can be used instead of redeveloping something else. And this can be done through collaborations and then to be spread in the EU. And this is aligned with the CRM Act that allows today synergies between R&D projects and the emergence of sound European industrial projects. It has to be used for mitigating the risks. Today, there are translation tables, bridging tables between different classifications. However, when we translate from one classification to UNFC, and if you translate back from UNFC to the former classification, I'm sure that you will not find back the initial results. So there is a risk of missing information during translation, but it's all the case also between foreign languages anyway. A risk of loss of information because some parameters are in one classification and not in the others. And also because the different classifications do not address the same stakeholders or decision makers. So we need a benchmark of classifications and a clear identification of pro and cons, strengths and weaknesses. And the quality of the data is also very important. And we have, in particular with the industries, we need to define a communication framework between geosurveys and industries, and therefore improve this framework for allowing a transparency between industry and geosurveys under a confidentiality agreement, but that will allow a clear classification. To conclude, 3 points for you to discuss: value chain approach, harmonizing and sharing, and mitigating the risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you. I think it was inspiring presentation to actually open up the issues of the future. And we'll get a response on that, of course, during the panel discussion and the questions from the audience. But firstly, let me introduce the panelists. We have 3 chairs of the working groups of EGRM, the Minerals Working Group, Hendrik, Anthropogenic Resources, Ulrich, Commercial Applications, Sigurd, and Léane is with us, practitioners of UNFC. So I would start with Hendrik and maybe ask him for his intervention first on the presentation or on the future of UNFC. Where are the future directions?
All right. I am impressed by the task that Stefan has presented. I think it's a giant task, and it's one that many jurisdictions face. It's not unique to any one country or place. It is anyone who has mining in their country has this problem. I think the solution that you've chosen is an excellent one. I think the concept of harmonization and transparency is critical. And I would say that in the past, there's sort of confidentiality, keeping information tightly held to one's chest, that those days have disappeared. There's more value to be gained by having information open and accessible and understandable. I think one of the dangers with this kind of a project is one gets lost in the details. So I think discrete timelines as well as discrete goals of how you get to a successful point that's useful early, while not having met all of the goals that you necessarily meet for or want to meet for the entire project. So you have to have early successes as well as longer term goals. That's something that you have to address internally as well, just to make sure that you don't get lost in getting into very much of the details of a single project and not having a fully usable product at the end of your time and resources. I think the UNFC is well adapted to this kind of a project. I've watched other jurisdictions use it to good effect, but I think others have better experience and can express that as well. So those are my initial thoughts on the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Hendrik. I will call Ulrich, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for this kind overview on the key elements that should be implemented in the future. And I think everything that was said and given in the presentation is applicable to both for mineral resources in the mining sector, let's just say, and also for the secondary raw materials that could come, yeah, from the anthropogenic deposits in the mining sector, but also for post-consumer residues, yeah. But currently, so the principles are applicable to any kind of resource, I think, yeah. Nevertheless, I see different levels of speed, let's just say, between the mining sector and the secondary raw materials coming from the post-consumer residues. I'm aware, and it's great that the Geological surveys are now also starting to classify the deposits in analogy, the anthropogenic deposits, I mean, the residues, the tailings and the waste rocks and so forth, in analogy to the mining sector. This is also considered and foreseen in existing standards like PERC, for instance. So you can also apply them to the tailings. But if we're coming to the post-consumer residues, yeah, like batteries, WEE, construction, demolition waste, I see that the application of UNFC started in the academic world, let's just say. So universities, research institutions started to test the application of the UNFC. And now geological surveys also start to build on their experience from classifying deposits and what was done in the academic world to classify secondary raw materials from post-consumer residues. But the level of formalization and the level of institutionalization, yeah, to classify recycling projects are far beyond the current levels in the mining sector and what is currently done for the anthropogenic deposits in the mining sector. So I see these different levels of speed, yeah. And the question is how to ramp up the activities to further classify, create, and update the inventories for secondary raw materials from post-consumer residues.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll give the floor to Sigurd. Sigurd, please.
So there, that you didn't have to listen to that. But anyway, I do thank the organizers and the room for the questions. It's really inspiring. I back off a bit. Where are we in history? I take the UN mission in 2 words: never again. We have failed, and that does influence the plan going forward. We have the SDGs. We need to meet them, and the 1.5 degree. It is challenging. There is going to have to be change, and that means we can't comfortably believe that we can proceed without looking at how to do that intelligently. I would point, and I would support my colleague Stefan Bug on the public-private partnership. My view of public-private partnership that I would share with you is that there are 3 main parties. It is the government that sets the framework conditions on which the industry should be able to deploy its best capabilities in ways that the capital market can finance. Those are the 3 I would emphasize. They will only be able to act as a partnership if they share standards and metrics. And the UNFC is a tool for that. I would say briefly a few things about the UNFC. You've heard lots about it. The essentials, in my view, is that it has a source and it has a reference point. In anthropogenic resources, the source is dynamic. In extractive activities, it is static. The reference point defines the products that the projects will produce, and everything between the source and the reference point will be expressed as measured at the reference points. The E-axis, it has viability, full viability, and it has non-viability. Those are easy to identify. The non-viability will be those that will not lead to sales or use. And then there is E2 in between. So everything that is not either viable or non-viable will be E2, and it is a complex task to work it. I could come back to that in many ways, but let me go to the F-axis. The F-axis can be complicated or simple. If you want it simple, you look at it as simply describing the activities you are doing. So it is exploration, it is design, it's development, it's production, it's abandonment. It is not difficult to know where you are. And so the classification itself in the E and the F matrix is something that can be done quite easily. Then we come to the metrics. And this is where change came at the last expert group on resource management, when it was decided that the metrics shall be the metrics that projects carry. We are talking projects, and that users need. So it is of course rocks in place and products sold, but it is also all the other metrics that the project carry and that the user needs. So cash flow, forecasts, labor demands, energy, etc. The test is what the users need. And then also at the last EGRM, quality assurance, quality control came in very strongly. There is a definition, and Vitor might be in the room, for the qualified person. In addition, there was also a decision to adopt the regular industrial quality assurance, quality control standards as expressed, for instance, in ISO 9001. The next steps, and I know I'm exceeding my time, moderator, I apologize, is to enhance the basics for performing efficient resource management. And I would second Victor's statement this morning that resource management is the privilege of the nation. Knowing that, of course, to meet the goals, it is essential to have what our keynote speaker mentioned today, a decision support for the resource management. And this is where I think the UNFC should move going forward to address the decision support that the public-private partnership needs to have in order to meet what is written down in the UNRMS, in the SDGs, in the 1.5 degree, and in the enhancement of globalization and trade, so that the conflicts between nations become more and more difficult to militarize. Thank you.
Thank you, Sigurd. Thank you for your thoughts. Last not least, Léane.
Thank you, moderator. Slavko. I also want to thank you, Stefan, great opening. I have two takes, many takes, but two big ones are, how do we secure the critical raw material supply chains within Europe? That's one. But also how we secure the raw materials for future generations. How do we do it in sustainable way, environmentally, socially aspects, taking the environmental, social aspects in consideration. It's about sustainable resource management at the end. Stefan had a good point on we need to define a communication framework for governments and industries. But also when we go in the practical level, we need to recognize and define the data holders within each country. If we look at how we go the next step of implementation of UNFC in Europe, we need to have a recognition of member states who are the data holders and recognize the key experts, geoscientists, database experts, the contact points to the ministries and how we then build the structure and plan and workflow in a way for what are the essential data that we need and information needed for UNFC implementation. It's about data, and data availability is very critical. And when we look at this in broader view, we have geological surveys that are the practical level. We have mining authorities, which many times they hold the data as well. So we need to have some sort of a structure and how we can communicate there. The implementation of UNFC at the end is a technical level task as well. It might be under geological survey experts, state commissions of mineral reserves, and other institutions. And therefore, training modules are a very important part. And it comes from sharing expertise and experiences, but also more importantly, that we have a common understanding how UNFC classification and methodologies are used in national mineral inventories. Thank you.
Thank you, Léane. Thank you. I made the notes, but I guess I was not the only one. So we will have the discussion also after this session. But if I would summarize all four speakers, I would say, don't get lost in details. We are in a different speed with the different resources. We have to take into account that. We have to enhance the basics so we would be able to get into the support system for the resource management, and we need also to advance the resource management that would be able to follow the goals, SDGs and 1.5 degree. And the last one was about capacity building, sharing knowledge. So this is what I took from this discussion. I would now open the floor to the audience for the questions. But firstly, maybe going back directly to the presentation as such, my question to you, Stefan, directly, being a director of a National Minerals Intelligence Agency unit. In your opinion, how much time your agency would need to actually set up a UNFC-based mineral inventory?
So you mean at the French level?
Yes.
Well, based on different presentation, I think if we just clearly address projects, maybe I can say 1 day at the French level. Now, if we go back to the mineral inventory, according to the fact that there are not so many, maybe 150, 200, who say a year, when somebody as Léane, for example, is skilled and with friends, they can work 1 day on all the data we have. Of course, it's based on the data we have, but in 1 day, they can manage one project. So I say a year.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe just an additional one. I think this is a very good news that, let's say, around 1 year, this could be established on the satisfactory level. Here I would also expose, and it's come out, and this is basically my vision or task more for the future, would be how to ensure the quality control in performing UNFC classification. So how is this done with the agency?
For sure, quality control is clearly the key. I mentioned it during my speech, and we need clearly people identified that are acknowledged, that are qualified, recognized by the community to perform such quality controls. And based on the fact that I work for a geological survey, I would say that this capacity should be at the geological survey. With the people accredited, people clearly identify, even potentially at the state level, to be able to perform such quality control. So, yeah. But...
Thank you. Thank you. Opening the floor, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Slavko, and thanks, Stefan, for the excellent presentation, and to the panel for the good discussions. You said before that data is crucial. I believe it was Léane who said that, and Sigurd also mentioned that it's up to the governments to set up the framework conditions. And I wonder if in the case of France, you are also considering to use UNFC as a tool to promote dialogues with communities and with populations, because in many countries, what we are seeing, especially in some European countries, is that the communities, they don't trust governments. So setting up framework conditions or defining whatever without talking with communities first might be, in a way, dangerous. And the UNFC, it seems to me like a proper tool to promote dialogues and transparency. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vitor. For sure, UNFC can be used for communication, for raising awareness, for sharing a level of knowledge, and informing the people on the different information given by the axis. In France right now, I would say, unfortunately, there are not so many projects where we can apply this, but it's clearly something that can be done. Yesterday, Léane mentioned and tested the exercise on the Imeris case. For sure, it could be a good way to communicate with the population, in particular in France, in the case of the future public debate or public discussions around the project, having this UNFC with a European or international level of information and ranking that is brought in could be very useful. Already today, when Imeris presents the project, they always refer to the IRMA standards that they are working with, but this does not talk to the people, and UNFC could be such a tool, yes. But again, I'm not the expert, and my colleagues here are much more aware of this, but they can tell me yes or no if I'm right or no, and I'm right. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other thought or a question in the room? Yes, please.
I would just like to add one point to that. I would encourage you to engage the industry that is active in France as a review, as a check and a balance on activities as you're moving through the process. Having them participate and confirm or point out errors early is much better than having it all as a final product and then coming to a conclusion that you're not communicating effectively or people don't understand what you're really presenting. And that speaks to what Vitor was pointing out as well. This is truly a communication tool, and it can be well used for that.
Thank you. Any other thought from the panel or the audience? Sigurd, yeah.
Thank you for excellent presentation and the stimulus. Thank you for the stimulus, also for the excellent presentation. I'm interested in one component of the UNFC is the competent person. Presumably, if people are going to be unified into using the system and making the use easier for them and consistent through all the countries who have invested heavily now in building their project according to that helpful tool. I was wondering whether the one of the tasks for the competent persons to be competent by making sure these projects are conducted according to the what is UNFC about, and also from outside, that means all the stakeholders who are involved in the communication or involved in the use are accompanied to be able to perform to that level. So it's a double, basically a double task, is being competent in the project that being conducted, but also competent to making sure that all the policies adopted, all the consultation have taken place, to be able that all the stakeholders have a say and also properly consulted during the process. Thank you.
Anyone from the panel wants to take this? Sigurd, yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Malika, for asking that question. On first, words are sometimes important, and competence has two meanings in English. One is that you have the right to rule. A court has competence to rule. Does not mean that it is qualified, but it may be. Here we have, and the other is, of course, that the person is qualified. And I think in the UNFC and in the management of the large engineering projects that we're really talking about, if we work on the left side of the decimal point on projects that move the needle, then quality assurance, quality control is essential, and it goes beyond just measuring the rocks. It is the assurance that the projects are conducted properly, and it is a process involving many experts, and there are systems for it. The internal control systems are quite powerful for that, and of course qualified experts are included in such a system. So that goes for quality assurance, quality control, not to just have the inventory written correctly, but having the project performed safely and efficiently. So this is what we're really dependent on. And the second element in what you said was the inclusion of the communities. And here, I think that is not something one can do in an afternoon. It is a structuring of transparency around what the activities are about, and to ensure that in the public domain there is reliable information that is not something that can be manipulated by false truths, so to speak, but that there is a competent authority that issues reliable information on, say, in Norway, that would be on oil and gas. It is published with uncertainty ranges and so forth, very transparent. Politics are not about questioning that. That is taken for granted, and this also opens up for consensus over periods that are longer than the election periods for the parliament, for instance. And our projects span many election periods, and they have to have safe and stable framework conditions. So this is essential. Yeah.
Thank you. Charlotte, we have a question from...
Thanks, Slavko. I think there's Anthony Otto that you have your hand up. Did you want to take the floor for this session? Did you want to ask a question, Anthony? If the moderator, if you could give him the floor, thank you.
Okay. Hello. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. It is my pleasure to be here. I'm in geology with over 15 years of experience. Mining geology specifically from Nigeria, and I'm pleased to be here and to speak on this. Resource management for sustainability development is a good one, but I want to ask, do we have any plan? Because one of the problems of resource management as concerning Africa, from my own point, from Nigeria, one of the basic problems, like Dr. Stefan Bock said, is collaboration with investor and openness, transparency. What is your plan for Africa when it comes to green energy? Do we have any model, any plan for Africa when you are talking about green energy? And then we have the issue of quality control. Yes, this is a basic problem here. For instance, let it be known to you most of the people who get these minerals out of Nigeria, for instance, always require for SGS quality control. Here in Nigeria, I think in Ghana, there is nothing like SGS in the mineral sector. Yes, Nigeria have one or two issues in the past, and maybe that make the SGS to pack out of Nigeria or West African country. So do you have any working model of collaboration with the government? If there is none, are you planning to have anyone? And the area of supply chain, after an agency in the West, in the African region, why not work with HAFTA? So Tunde,
somehow it got muted, but we got the questions. I think it is about collaboration, green minerals, and quality control. With regard to green minerals, I believe Tunde would be the person how this would go further, or with regard to quality control, I think the panel could answer. And we have the collaboration. This is a broad issue that concerns the whole EGRM group and the future activities. I think all 3 points are very, very valid. And we have some response to the green minerals part, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. With regards to the green minerals, as Africa, we are drafting a strategy that will inform how we engage with our collaborators, you know, like the EU, North America or South America, I mean, globally. This strategy, I'll talk about it this evening. I'm on the panel. I'll talk about the orientation of that strategy. So indeed, we have a framework in the offing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If I do the brief takeaways from the last part or the last discussion, I would say UNFC is also an important communication tool. Engaging with the industry regarding the quality control and communication is essential, as well as the competent person or qualified expert or whatever we call it. And of course, the further collaboration within the EGRM is essential in that part. With this, I would conclude this session. I would also conclude the seminar. Thank all the speakers for a very fruitful event.